Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. Today we have a showdown between two deep divers from the premier brands in mainstream luxury horology. On the left, we have the Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meter, and on the right, we have the Rolex Oyster Perpetual Sea-Dweller. This is the 126600. A timepiece showdown between watches of disparate price and position in their catalogs. They're similar enough in size and capability that I think we've got a fight on our hands. Let's start with the underdog, and by all measures, the Omega Seamaster is the underdog. It costs less, Omega is the underdog brand, the market hasn't taken the same notice, and quite frankly, the watch is designed to compete with timepieces that are close to half the price of the Sea-Dweller. And this is a watch that retails new for a very reasonable $5,200, and pre-owned you'll see them selling on the bracelet, as you see here, in steel, for between $4,400 and $4,600. So new or used, this is a bargain. Now, both brands are offering 5-year warranties at this point, so that's not going to make the difference. But let's throw it on the wrist and see if we can get a sense of how it fits, because that will be the tail of the tape, as they say. Bare measurements, 42 millimeters, 13.7 millimeters thick, 50 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip, and the spacing between the lugs is 20 millimeters. On my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference, the watch wears well. I own the previous generation, and I mean original generation of this model from the 1990s. Mine is 41 and a lot thinner. This one at 42 definitely fills the wrist more. You can see from side to side, it doesn't overlap the edge of my wrist. I can recommend it for a wrist as small as 14 centimeters in circumference. The big difference between this and my old school Diver 300 meter is the thickness. It's not thick by Planet Ocean standards, but it is quite a bit thicker than, for example, a Submariner. Not a problem, though, because we're not comparing to the Sub today. The watch wears well, it's solid, and unlike previous generations of the Omega Seamaster, it makes no excuses when we get to the bracelet, where you can see the removable links are now fixed by screws rather than the original 1990s model's pin sleeves. Also, compared to the 90s models, we have a much more sporting bracelet. The side is clearly squared off compared to the top. We still have the polished intermediates and the staggered link alignment and link size, which gives it a little bit of an air of a dress bracelet, but in construction, it is now far sportier and more solid. You can see partial links are built into the bracelet, but we have a few different ways to size this. New for the 2018 model year, when this generation debuted, was the combination of the long-standing flip-out extension with a push-button slider. Previously, if you wanted to get that, you would have had to have purchased a Ploprof or Planet Ocean. Now you get both on the Diver 300 meter. Quite secure. We have a milled clasp, a thick gauge steel. All of it's nicely made. Both of these watches are machine finished, but to a high standard, with nice breaks between the polished and satinated elements. Another change for 2018, we have a conical as opposed to cylindrical helium escape valve, and in contrast to previous models, you can now open it up when you are underwater rather than being forced to make the call before you begin a saturation dive. Most folks won't need the helium escape valve, but it's there. It is a conversation piece, and it's there for bragging rights. The bezel is 120 click and fairly well defined, but the knurling on the edge of the Diver 300 meter bezel has always been relatively shallow compared to the sharp knurling of the Rolex dive bezels, so you're going to want to set this before the dive because it'll get a little bit slimy and difficult to gain traction with your fingertips. On both watches, we have a ceramic insert atop the metal bezel, so scratch resistance there. We have shouldered crown guard, and then we have a dial of metallized ceramic. You can see zirconium oxide just below the hand. So this is a zirconium oxide ceramic dial that has been metallized to give it a chrome appearance. Now you have a couple of different choices of bracelet bezel color and dial color on this model. In contrast to the Sea-Dweller, there is some flexibility, and you can spec this one the way you like it. We have applique blued indices and the skeleton-style James Bond hands, as they're known, as this is also known as the Bond Seamaster. The generation, launched in 1993, became famous on the wrist of Pierce Brosnan during his turn as 007, and Omega has kept that design, this design, in the catalog since 93, making it the longest-lived Seamaster design of all time. Flip it over and you can see the movement. Caliber 8800, automatic winding. coaxial escapement, master chronometer, which is all the COSC standards, but more, as the master chronometer test includes winding efficiency, power reserve, chronometry, shock resistance, and anti-magnetism, along with water resistance, a full test of the chronometric properties, but also the durability and reliability of the watch. We have quick set date, we have hacking seconds, we have the coax escapement in its tri-level form, we have a 55-hour power reserve. And of course, we can see the 35 joule movement through the case back. Now let's check out Rolex. You can see Rolex is all about evolution. Now, this watch doesn't look distinctly different from either the deep sea or the sub at first glance, but this model, launched in 2017, was the 50th anniversary piece for the Sea-Dweller collection, originally launched in 1967. It was originally part of the Submariner family and later became a distinct model line in its own right, but we see a nod to history here with the return of the red Sea-Dweller script back when these were known as heavy-duty Submariners, and you would have seen that red script on the dial in the 1970s. Helium escape valve, different implementation than we have on the Omega. It still opens up to release gas from the interior of the watch, but it does so automatically. You don't have to screw it open or shut, and it is flush with the case band. The watch is 1,220 meters water resistant, and it's 43 millimeters in diameter, and measures rather chunky, 15.1 millimeters thick. Normally, you would say with the sub, thinness is one of its advantages over the Seamaster, but as the Sea-Dweller is a harder core sports watch, it is actually thicker than the Seamaster Diver 300 meter. It's broader too, 50.2 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip and 53.7 millimeters from solid end link to solid end link, with a broad 22 millimeter spacing between the lugs. We're going to throw it on my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference, and we'll take a look at how it fits. It's definitely larger, but I have to say, if you're thinking of this as a deep sea minus 1 millimeter, you're probably getting the wrong idea. I can't wear a deep sea every day. I could absolutely wear this every day. I don't want to say it wears closer to the sub than the deep sea, but it is starting to feel that way now that the sub is a 41 millimeter watch. And whereas the deep sea for me would be purely a purpose watch or a party watch, this really could be my everyday companion. And I think a wrist down to 15 centimeters circumference could wear this one well, whereas the Seamaster I think you could wear well on a wrist down to 14 centimeters circumference. Taking a look at the bracelet, it's the Oyster design. Considerably less intricate and busy than the design on the Seamaster. You can see it has a nice taper to it, whereas on the Seamaster we have symmetrical links that are straight all the way out from the lug. Rolex is a little bit more thoughtful about its detailing with a taper to the bracelet. The outer faces are polished. You can see the tops are satinated. We have removable links fixed by screws, but we don't have quite as many removable links, nor do we have quite as much incremental sizing via half links. You can see there's really just the one. Now we have glide lock, which is 20 millimeters of incremental adjustment in 2 millimeter increments. Then we have flip lock, which is another extension. This one's all or nothing, and while we do have a dual stage extension system on the Seamaster, this gives you more total extensible range, as the Omega only has 9.6 millimeters of incremental sliding adjustment, and then it has a pull-out, but the pull-out isn't quite this broad, so we have both more incremental sizing and more all or nothing flip-out sizing here on the Sea-Dweller. So quite a bit more functionality built into the bracelet, even if at face value they both have 2 degrees of adjustment. Now taking a quick look at the timepiece, you can see it's relatively simple. There's a lot less to the modern Oyster case in terms of design than there is to the Seamaster, which has a rather complex lyre-style lug profile and a judicious blend of polish and satination. Now you can see on the Sea-Dweller we have relatively sheer sides and squared off ends. You can see that this one is in outstanding condition, and in fact includes a little bit of its factory packing armor on its flanks. The crown guard is just as substantial on the two. It's a triplock crown, screw down on both. And then we have a bezel. Let's have a listen to it. It's also 120 clicks, but it is far more positive. The detent is sharper. The action feels more refined. And while they both have inlays of ceramic on their bezel tops, this one uses cold enamel paint to fill it, and this one uses deposits of platinum in the wells for the numerals and indices. grab my polishing cloth. One of the features I enjoy about Rolex cases, though they are ultimately going to be machine-made, is that the quality of the polishing on the side is as good as you'll find on Grand Seiko. Now, Grand Seiko is artisanal finish. What you can see right here is that, well, Rolex doesn't lose anything from the fact that their process is automated. This is mirror smooth and distortion-free and really quite beautiful. The bezel has a combination of polishing and satination on its knurled edge, and the knurling is easier to grip than on the Seamaster. I can also say that the dial is probably a little bit easier to read by day. There is a lot of visual noise on the Omega dial, and the hands themselves aren't quite as distinct because of their skeleton form, whereas the hands on the Rolex are a little bit easier to read. I will say this, the Cyclops date on the Rolex feels extraneous on a diver. Take an extra moment to focus and you can see the date on this watch, and it's also a cleaner dial as a result. Let's do a Lume shot real quick. I mean, it's tough to call, but I think I'm going to give it to the Omega because the differential lume, the green minute hand and bezel pearl, makes it easier to grasp the location of those two elements at a moment's notice. Really just one glance and you know how much time is left in your dive timing. I can't say one has a huge advantage over the other, but by narrow degrees, I'm giving it to the Omega. All right, so let's talk about our movement in the Rolex. 70-hour power reserve, hacking seconds, quick set date, niobium zirconium anti-magnetic hairspring to silicon in the Omega. We've got a COSC chronometer certification, but Rolex then cases the watch up and guarantees it will run no worse than -2 + 2 seconds per day. That is their superlative chronometer standard. Omega undoubtedly comes close, but they make no explicit promise of that level of accuracy. In both these watches, we have a full balance bridge with a free-sprung index for shock tolerance and some variety of chronometer certification. We have the coaxial escapement here, but we have the chronergy escapement here. One is created by ligamines to essentially update the traditional Swiss lever, and then the other one is a direct and indirect impulse tangential contact escapement that basically performs the same task, extending power reserve, improving short-term precision, and improving long-term timing stability. So the watches, technically speaking, are just about a wash. The Omega with the silicon hairspring might be slightly more anti-magnetic, but it is very close. So advantages of the Rolex include its depth rating. Right off the bat, 1,220 meters is much more than 300. It could be academic, but nevertheless, more is better. Bezel feel, and sound for that matter. It simply sounds and feels like a more expensive watch and a more precise instrument. Clasp. We have both more incremental extension and total extension, and that's an advantage in Rolex's favor. This is the one to buy new, though it costs $11,700 new. Pre-owned, you're looking at about $16,900 to $17,100. It could go as high as $17,500 if it's all in the original plastic with full warranty. So this is a watch that's going to gain value when you buy it in today's market. That's not something you can say of the Omega. Finally, I think the helium escape valve implementation is more attractive, and really there's no price to be paid here because it's flush with the case, whereas here there is an aesthetic trade-off and maybe even a little bit of fit issue with a really tight cuff. Omega, advantages, price new or used. This watch is $5,200 new. Used, as you see it here, $4,450. Whether you buy it new or you buy it used, that's a huge saving, perhaps up to $10,000 or more saved compared to buying the new or pre-owned Sea-Dweller. Although it is not a thin watch, it is thinner, and moreover, it has no brand baggage. Omega doesn't carry quite the cachet of Rolex, but at the same time, people aren't going to be casing your wrist, sizing you up for a robbery, or asking you whether it's real or how much it cost. For the most part, if you get any comments, there'll be compliments about your handsome watch, and questions about what it is. Those I find to be the most fun types of questions to field from strangers. Also important to note, there are strap and dial color options here that you can get from Omega, whereas the Rolex is pretty much as you see it, or a polarizing two-tone variant. Now, this watch has a display case back. If you like to see the movement, it's not hand finished, it's not beautiful, but if you like to see the movement, advantage Omega. No Cyclops eye. Can you see the date? Well, if I were to move the hands, you certainly could. Right now, it's the 6th. I don't need that wart on the dial to tell me. And the Sea-Dweller traditionally did not feature a Cyclops. This was the first Sea-Dweller to feature a Cyclops, and I think it's a miss. Finally, fit. The watch is shorter across the wrist, it's thinner, and it is nominally smaller as a 42 compared to a 43. It wears better on my wrist, and if your wrist is my size or smaller, you want the Omega. So which one do I prefer? Well, based on the price advantage, it has to be the Omega. The Omega, in my judgment, is just an incomparably better value unless you need that extraordinary diving depth where you just can't live with the helium escape valve. In the hand, to the eye, the watches appear to be of equal quality. The only clear distinction between them, as far as I can tell, is the price. They even both come with a 5-year warranty, so this one's going to be down to your judgment and your budget, but I think Omega has built a better watch for the money, certainly, and competitively speaking, the Sea-Dweller should not even be in the same ballpark of comparison as the Seamaster Diver 300 meter. The fact that we can make this comparison is perhaps the ultimate testament to the Omega's superiority, at least in my eyes. Let me know, which of these two would you choose? Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.